I really felt like doing this tonight, and I thought this was a good way to introduce it and kind of talk about the struggles that we had making it in the last couple of episodes. Welcome everybody to another episode of Six Set Bro. Man, it's been a long time. So for anybody that's just joining us for the first time here at Six Set Bro, things are a little bit different. I'll just give you a quick recap. Six Set Bro has always been a podcast. It's something that I developed a long time ago. At a time whenever I seen the Northern Irish music scene as something that was really lacking a platform that would promote local music and try and mix it in a way with, actual informative news, more or less in a way that was entertaining for the masses. Exclusively a local music news podcast is only really listened to by musicians, so the idea of Six Set Bro was to create something that didn't just talk about local music news, but it also spoke about international music news, maybe grassroots bands from across the pond, but also very popular things happening in the music scene, or current events. So trying to bring all those things together so that the local music of Northern Ireland would be inflated to the levels of everything else, because it's equally as important. We did our last episode a long time ago. We made it to episode 69. Great number to end on. And really the thing that got in the way was that I had children. I'll be honest with you. I have 2 kids now, and it's pretty hard to do a podcast whenever you have children. And I couldn't commit to it, and I said to the guys, because I ran out with my brother and one of my best friends, and we kind of just had to put the whole thing on hiatus. So I reached out to them and said, look, in a way, I kind of want to bring it back. A lot of people have kind of showed interest in it, which is amazing to me that so many people actually care to bring it back. And so many people tell me, like, oh, I miss the days of Six Set Bro. That's another conversation topic I'll get into. But, it's very hard for me to plan the time with everybody. I'm really hoping I can find a way where me, Andy, and Mike can collaborate and bring it together so it's the 3 of us again and not just me talking into a microphone. But we'll figure that out as we go. But for now, you've got me. And I guess the thing that I wanted to start with on this episode, which will be episode 70, a direct continuation, even if it is like 2 years later or whatever the hell it is at this point. I guess like the state of the local music scene, it's something that I'm not going to talk about a lot because I want to wait until I can discuss this with other people and not just have my fully formed opinion by myself. But I feel that part of the reason that we had to stop doing the podcast was that with me having kids now and having other commitments that I'm sorry, but are just more important than doing any of this, it was really hard to find information, post-pandemic. So understandably, pandemic happens, there's not a lot of music news to talk about. There really wasn't. I mean, we could do the podcast. There was maybe some things to chat about, but locally there was like nothing happening in this country because everything's shut down. And then even afterwards, I just felt like there was this complete seismic shift from what used to feel like a local area community, something where it's like, well, I knew everybody and I knew what was going on, and you kind of knew where to find information about what was happening, to just something devoid of anything creative. And it's not to say it wasn't happening. Like, I don't even feel that was the case at all. I don't think that people stopped making music. I don't think that people stopped being creative in this country. I think the seismic shift was really due to the change in social media and how that operates now. Like, we're so used to it now, but even though some people kind of talked it down back when we were doing this podcast, which is crazy because it's only a couple of years ago. I'm talking like it's a long time back, but I mean, you're talking a couple of years ago. Like, it used to be easy. We seen whenever shows were happening. It's like if there was a show in this venue, you got invited to it on a Facebook event or something simple like that. You were friends with all the bands, and whatever band was playing, it's kind of like, oh, this band's playing there, these guys are releasing this. You see that on your Facebook timeline or on your Instagram timeline. That doesn't happen anymore. I think we're all quite aware at this point that Facebook is akin to the dead internet theory, which, if you haven't found that, please go and Google it somewhere. But the summary of that is, the dead internet theory is basically that it's just bots creating content for other bots to comment on. That's what Facebook feels like. I follow a lot of things on there. I follow a lot of people. I have a lot of friends on there. Do I ever see any of your content? No, never. I never see anything you post. And I would much rather see it, but all I see are ads or sponsored channels that I do not follow, but for some reason it wants to show me. So I don't see whenever you're playing a show anymore. I don't see whenever you're releasing a single. I see none of that. And that kind of started during the pandemic and post-pandemic, and it was really hard to run a podcast whenever like all of our research efforts were kind of going completely blank. Like we had nothing. I'm, trying to look after kids here in the house. I'm trying to work a full-time job. I'm trying to be a musician as well. And, the thought of doing this podcast was always a way of giving back to the local music scene, something I could do to help promote other people. But it was exhausting trying to find the information anymore. And, we asked people to send things in, and at times they would, but I mean, that's not always the case. And I was very much up to the challenge to go looking for information. Not easy to find in the way that things worked back then, even more so now. On these apps that we use, I see nothing. Like, I can see popular and current events. I can see advertisements. I can see sponsored posts. I rarely see what your band does. And there's a good part of me that really thought, what is the point of ever doing a podcast again? Because what are the odds you're even going to see this video clip that I probably put together as an ad as a way for you to try and see it? I trim it down so that it's like a 30 seconds clip that's really quick and easy to digest, and you might see it on your timeline. Like, that's the idea, but it's literally the opposite of why we started the podcast. So again, just to go back briefly, one of the first thoughts I came up with whenever I was like, let's do a podcast for this. Again, I guess the thing that always annoys me whenever I say this, I'm going to have a drink, sorry. One of the things that constantly annoys me whenever I talk about this is I feel like I'm making myself out like I invented podcasts. And that's not the case. Whatever you may think, this is not true. I did not invent podcasts. But what I will say, think of this what you will, but there really wasn't many going on in here. Like, not in this country. Definitely not in this niche of local music. And I think there's a lot more now. That, I'm not saying that has anything to do with me, by the way. I'm not humble bragging or anything, but it was the reason that I wanted to do it in the first place was that my issue with getting, say, radio airplay as a band is it feels like a big thing. But whenever you go on a radio show, a lot of the time they're like, oh, so when did you first start playing music? Or when did you first start playing guitar? You know, what are your influences? Like, it was just the same questions all the time. And I don't feel it really, like, does anything. Like, the whole idea of going on radio is someone to listen to your song and hear you talk about it and connect with that in some way. Because let's be honest, the way that songs and art works at the minute, in my opinion, is that it doesn't really matter how good the song is. It's a huge part of it. It's got to be good. But it's kind of who you are as a person as well, I think. Plays a big factor in that. What you're about, what do you think about, what do you support, you know, and people can relate to that, and if they can relate to you as a person, then on some level they relate to your music. So the idea of the podcast was like long form content. You know, what if we bring a musician on to talk for like an hour or 2 hours? There's no real like basic questions that you're gonna get in that. That's a real conversation. That's where you're gonna be talking for a prolonged period of time about all kinds of shit, stuff that matters and stuff that doesn't matter. And I think it worked pretty well. I know that I got into a lot of bands or a lot of artists that I might not have had we not done the podcast and invited them on and had me talk to them and sort of be like, oh, I really like this person. Like, I'm gonna listen to their music again, because kind of what you do is like inviting guests on, I listen to their music first, and there's no specific people that come to mind, but it's not like, you know, I don't have some sort of instant connection with the music always, but then we have them on the podcast and then I talk to them and you find out stuff about them or what their process was, or they relate to you in a way to be like, yeah, I totally get that. And then the relation speaks through the music. You start to humanize them a little bit. And I think that's what most of us find in music, is some sort of emotional relatability. So anyway, long story short, the whole idea of the podcast was to give people a longer platform to not talk about surface level stuff. And the problem is, even though we've seen it going that way, in the last 4 years especially, stuff is surface level, and it's short attention span, quick video, like 30 seconds, you're in, you're out. You gotta acknowledge that a lot of people aren't listening to this with any audio. Like, I'm gonna assume right now, I cut this into a clip, there is no audio, and you're reading the subtitles, and depending what I say in these subtitles will depend on whether you switch the little sound icon on or not. And that says a lot about where we're at. But that's enough about me, like, trying to pretend like I know a way to fix the system. There's no way to fix that. Like, that's just where we're at, and I do the same thing. As much as I love music, and I could talk about it for days on end, I don't really know how to fix that, because I do the same thing. I'm a huge music fan. Do I necessarily go searching for stuff? Not really. You know, I really make a concerted effort that if I see something across my timeline and I think it sounds good, I just automatically add it to say a Spotify like list, or I save their band name on my notes app, I do something like that. Because I'm not going to pretend like I'm some sort of, I don't know, fight the power, like I don't have Spotify guy. Like I have Spotify, my music's on there. I'm sorry, but that's kind of the way shit works, for better or worse, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I'm scrolling across stories and story hits. Hey, that song sounds pretty good. I add it to my like songs even if I don't have time to listen to it, and I've just got like 10 seconds where I hear something and I add it. And I'm like, I'm going to get back to that later. And the problem with that is those people who have done that have spent money. They've spent money to get it in front of my face, and I hate that is the idea that I'm promoting to people, but that's kind of what worked for me, was whatever was getting thrown in my face, then I'm like, oh, okay, add it in there, listen to it later, and then the stuff I like I keep, and the stuff that I'm not so sure gets tossed or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. More or less, I don't have a way of fixing it, put it that way. But I have a bit more time for myself now. A little bit more than I did have. It's still pretty crazy, which is why I would never commit to bringing this back long term, or committing to like a weekly podcast like what we used to do. But I really felt like doing this tonight. And I thought this was a good way to introduce it and kind of talk about the struggles that we had making it in the last couple of episodes. Because, I mean, I was trolling through stuff, trying to find like gigs that were happening, trying to find people who were releasing music. It felt to me like nothing was happening, and it was because the information was so hard to come by. I mean, what's what you could boil it down to of almost the beginning of the end of the podcast, was like it was so difficult to find information on anybody anymore. And I guess you could argue you could go out and look for it. I had one kid, and then I had a second kid. I wasn't really going out to gigs. All right. I've only recently re-entered the music scene as a musician, where I'm actually playing shows. I played my first show playing bass for Sarah McCready at her album launch, and that was a big moment for me because it had been a long time since I played a live show. Like, I think I worked it out, and it was like maybe 4 years, 3 to 4 years anyway. I can't backdate it exactly. It didn't feel like that long, but I'm like looking around, and my firstborn is 4 now, 4.5 pretty much, which is nuts. And I kind of said to myself at the time, whenever he was born, that I'm gonna put the brakes on the whole music thing for a while, because this is more important. This is what I'm focusing on, obviously. Like, all that stuff can just stay to the side. It's a passion project. I'll still do some stuff, but I'm definitely not gigging anytime soon. And before you know it, you're like 4.5 years later, and you're like, oh shit, that's a long time. So I felt like I wanted to do this tonight. And I guess it's weird. The feeling kind of came from like I was sitting down. I didn't have much to do. I've been listening to the new Eminem record, which is the Death of Slim Shady. And I feel quite ill prepared to even talk about it, I guess. But it was really weird. So I felt like I wanted to make some sort of video about it, to talk about it. Because I just feel like there's loads of misunderstanding around it. Despite the fact that I was one of the people that made fun of the content quite a lot, and would constantly make fun of Eminem in general, because I'm just like, he's so, like, out of touch, I guess. Like, that's how it's felt for a long time. And I wouldn't even say, like, for the nostalgia bit aspect, that back in the day I was a huge Eminem fan. I think I liked him as much as most teenagers liked him for, like, oh, he's saying crazy stuff in the early 2000s, which is a perfect time whenever you're, you know, against the status quo, I guess. Like, early 2000s was filled with bubblegum pop and, like, boy bands and whatever. And he was just the polar opposite of that. Even on the singles, it's like, oh, he's so far gone. Then you listen to the album and it's like, whoa, you know, that's pretty crazy what you're saying. But at a certain age, you're like, oh, that's the coolest thing in the world. So you kind of like it. Anyway, years go on, and pretty much anything post-Encore, which I guess I'll say this for the people that maybe aren't too adept in Eminem lore. And just to preface this, I'm not that big on Eminem lore either. I'm not pretending to be an expert, but I know bits and pieces. And I think the last album that I was like, oh, this is hilarious, was Encore, which was released in 2004. And a lot of people even look back on that album and think that was terrible. Because what's came to light in later years was Eminem at the worst of his drug habits. Making almost no sense at all. And some of the most, like, crass songs just for the sake of being crass, I guess. I thought it was the funniest shit whenever I was of a certain age. Just, like, to me, that was really funny, I guess. But I don't know. There's a nostalgia thing to listen back that I still think some of it's funny, and it probably shouldn't be. But prior to that was the Eminem Show, which, again, once you get into the Eminem lore, I guess the main thing that you need to note is that he seems to use these different names for himself. Like, there's Eminem, there's Marshall Mathers, there's Slim Shady. And again, I think there would probably be, like, Eminem lore, like, experienced lore experts out there that will tell me the difference between all of them. But more or less all you need to know is that Slim Shady would be the alter ego of Eminem, or Marshall Mathers, his actual name. Slim Shady is the version of him that can say the most outlandish things and get away with it. He's that version of him that you see with the hockey mask on and the denim dungarees with a chainsaw. That's Slim Shady. Like, he can make a whole album talking about murdering people, and it's kind of like, oh, that's the character. And I guess get away with it. I don't know if that was the intent. And it's very different landscape now in 2024 from 2004, whenever Encore came out and he had songs making fun of Christopher Reeves that he is still doing in 2024, which is questionable, but I'll get to that. But in between 2004 and 2024, what happened was Eminem, or Marshall Mathers, I should say, had a massive drug overdose, almost died, like literally on death's door, almost died in 2007. And after that, he released his R series, I guess you could call it, but he had Recovery, Relapse, Revival, all albums that I guess had hits on it. Some people like them, like Love the Way You Lie and stuff like that. But I feel like this was the era that old school Eminem fans were like, he's weak now. He's like, what happened to this guy? The line that will always stick in my head is that he said something about like watching someone leave through a window, and that's why he calls it window pane. Like, all of his lyrics were like so bad, you were like, ugh, it was cringe beyond belief. And in later years he done like Kamikaze and Music to Be Murdered By, and again, I just think they were all subpar, not very good albums. Nothing that I paid too much attention to. And all the while saying, once again, I'm not a huge Eminem fan. I'm really not. But whenever this album was coming out, I was slightly... Sorry, I'm just raising my chair because I've been shrinking during this whole TED Talk. During the album release, like the whole promo of this album release, it being called The Death of Slim Shady, I think piqued my interest initially. And that was because I had a thought for a while that if I made an next solo album as Don Maple, which is what I call my musical alter ego, similar to Slim Shady, I guess, although I don't talk about killing people or whatever, but I have my own stage name. Yeah, for a long time I was like, it will be called The Death of Don Maple, and it will be the last one that I make with that title. And I had that thought for like a long time. So whenever I seen that Eminem's releasing an album called The Death of Slim Shady, I was like, oh, dude ripped off my idea. Like, I was so mad about it. And I was like, nobody's gonna ever believe me whenever I say that was my idea, but sure, whatever. So then I guess I got interested in it more than maybe I would have. And the single came out, which was called Houdini. And prior to that, there was all this stuff working up to be like, oh, Slim Shady's been killed. It pretty much looked like a metaphor to be like, you know, I am going to tank my career with this record. Like, I'm coming back to make a record where I say so much outlandish stuff that it will get me cancelled forever and nobody will ever want to listen to me again. I was like, okay, you've got my interest. I want to hear what you have to say, I guess. And then he released the first single, Houdini, which again just seemed like to harken back to a song from Eminem years back called Role Model, where he had this whole thing like, I'm gonna attempt to drown myself, you should try this at home, you should be just like me. Which is the whole idea of the song of like how ironic it is that why on earth would you want to be like this psychopath? Like, I'm saying all these crazy things and you're saying my kids want to be just like you. It's like, you need to get them checked out then, because they shouldn't want to be like me, because I have a lot of mental disorders that you should probably check out. So yeah, Houdini kind of seemed like it was off the back of that, I guess, just from the title, because, you know, Houdini chained in the tank has to escape sort of thing, whatever. Anyways, he releases the single, very much nostalgia bait. The video goes back to the video for Without Me, which is obviously a very popular Eminem song, including even parts of that song were in Houdini. Like, I mean, he's just sampled part for part. I was not, you know, into. I was like, this is the cringiest stuff I've ever heard. I had such a bad opinion of it, you know. And then after that, there was another single along with all this promo work. So it was still like this investigation of like who killed Slim Shady. There was like a news report being like, oh, somebody murdered him, who are the suspects, and all this sort of stuff. So like, it was an interesting album rollout. But then they released Toby, which I think I just heard the snippet of the chorus, and I think the fact that the chorus was like, Toby Maguire got bit by a spider, but me, it was a goat. It was just kind of like, dude, that is one of the worst lyrics I've ever heard, and I'm out. Like, I don't want to hear this album. I'm not that interested. This seems like the worst thing ever. Again, you're probably listening to this being like, why did I even want to talk about it then? And it's because, like most music, although I had that opinion and I joked about it to a couple of people, I was still of the opinion to be like, I mean, I'm still going to listen to it. and I'm still going to give it a chance the way the artist intended, which is always what I try to do. Especially, I mean, just on top of that, and anybody that knows me knows I'm a sucker for a concept album. Like, I love a conceptual piece of work. Like, I just love it. So whenever Eminem put on X, formerly known as Twitter, less said about that the better in the times that have passed since the last podcast. Whenever he put on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, that it's a concept album, the intended way to listen is from front to back, first song to last song. He's like, if you don't, you might be a bit lost. I was like, okay, I'm back in. I'll give this a shot like I'm going to. I'm not going to skip over anything because he said it's conceptual and I'm going to listen to it the whole way through. And I guess what I did not expect to happen was for me to get any sort of connection to this record whatsoever. And I did. It resonated. I didn't expect it to. I was almost pissed off about it. It's like it probably shouldn't have resonated. I don't think it should have. But it did. And I will tell you why. So, once I started to kind of understand the lore of what he was doing from listening through the album, I started to appreciate it in a different light to what I first seen. Hold on. Cheers. So what I mean by that is I feel that the narrative of this story, which could be wrong, by the way, don't take my word for it, get your own understanding if you're going to listen to it, but I feel that my interpretation is Slim Shady, who is somebody that Eminem has tried to... I'm going to stop calling him Eminem. For the purpose of this narrative, I will call him Marshall and Slim Shady, okay? I feel like in this narrative, Slim Shady has came back from the dead, essentially, to pester Marshall Mathers. Slim Shady is not just an excuse as an alter ego to say outlandish stuff, because I think sometimes that's what people assume that he is. But my interpretation is more that all the publicized things about Eminem, Marshall Mathers, whatever you want to call him, and his drug abuse, and the real issue that he had, the overdose he had, I believe that Slim Shady is kind of the embodiment of his addiction with drugs and, you know, drugs for coping. So essentially, you know, whenever he takes XYZ, he feels more confident to say crazy stuff, which even if he doesn't fully believe or want to embody, he can't deny the fact that that mental stuff that he spewed in the past is what made him famous. Like, it is in the words of the album if you listen to it, but essentially it's like he needs to appreciate that he said some crazy shit and it made him famous. So he needs to have some sort of love and appreciation for this side of him, but also acknowledge that he is not that person, but it's there somewhere. Like, where does the thought come from? It's like, does he take enough drugs or does he abuse himself with substance enough that this side of him comes out, so it's always in there? I don't even think that he knows by the sounds of the lyrics on the record, but the narrative seems to be that this Slim Shady alter ego that he has comes back from the dead, something that he thought he got rid of when he got sober, which was after his overdose in 2007, and he opted to get sober for his daughter and his family, and he did, and released what loads of fans said was his worst work. You know, his sober work was terrible, whereas they thought whenever he was higher than the Himalayas, that was the best stuff he ever did. So I get the conflict, man. That's crazy whenever you're there, you're still alive to see this. He didn't die from the overdose. He can see that people actually thought he was better when he was on stuff, as opposed to whenever he was sober. That must be difficult to deal with, but okay. And yeah, essentially the narrative seems to be that Slim Shady comes back. He's pumping Marshall full of drugs and alcohol to be like, I'm gonna take over. I'm, gonna come back. What would Slim Shady be like in 2024 whenever we're in a completely different landscape of what's acceptable? And I'm gonna say all this crazy stuff with the goal of getting your career cancelled. And look, don't get me wrong, on the surface, most of what he says seems like, I guess what a lot of reviewers have said is boomer Facebook. Like, that's what it looks like. He's hitting all the hits of the offensive stuff. I won't even talk about that anymore, but all the stuff you would expect to see on your, distant uncle's, like, Facebook, where you're just like, oh, that's, unfollow. That's the stuff that he says. And I get the cringe in it. I really do. But for some reason, the narrative rang true a little bit, that it was more to do with, look, he's got these thoughts in there, and he also knows, like, oh, I could probably say all this stuff and get a reaction out of people. I could probably say this stuff and get in more headlines than if I didn't say it, because that's what gave me fame last time. While on the side knowing that he has this, like, amazing talent for rhyme schemes and flows and just being an incredible rapper. But, most people have just put that down to, like, oh, he just says a bunch of stuff really fast. And that, it used to never be Eminem's thing to be, like, a fast rapper. Like, I think that's what bugs me the most, was that wasn't really his thing. The rhymes he came off with were great, but it was never like, oh, he's the fastest rapper. And then all of a sudden he made it his thing to show how high his skill level was like, I rap really fast. Nobody else can do this. And I actually, I would put it in the same camp of people that can shred guitar, like, insanely quick. It doesn't overly impress people. Like, it's incredibly hard to do. It is. But it's a thing where it's like, it doesn't have emotional resonance. It doesn't have people, like, they can't even hear half the jokes he's making and the fast raps that he does. And it's the same with a guitar solo. Like, if you shred so quickly that you don't get any, like, emotional pull, I just don't think it hits as hard. It just kind of starts sounding like noise a little bit. Like, it's impressive for the first second, maybe. That's why you can do it a little fast, and then you need to have some melody in there. If the whole solo's, like, super shredded, I just think people lose interest, is my honest opinion. But, that's just one guy's in a blue Hawaiian shirt. You think what you want to think. Anyways, as the narrative goes, it's like this whole thing of him having this nightmare that his alter ego has kidnapped him, like, stuffed him in the basement, like, he's popping him full of drugs, he's popping him full of alcohol, all the stuff he's been sober from, so that he can go out and say all this outlandish stuff, which, again, we're talking about them as if they're two different people, but I guess the idea really deep down is that if he did lock himself away and became unsober and he started taking all this stuff again, would he go on this level of being controversial for the sake of it? Is this what would happen? So he's playing it out in real time. And I seen a review before that said, like, Eminem tries to have his cake and eat it too, where, yeah, it's a pretty good cop-out, because he gets to say a lot of controversial stuff and then turn around and say, like, well, it wasn't me saying it, I'm just playing out a scenario as if I was in that bad place and I was still saying that stuff. I get it. I guess you could argue that point. But if I really try and play the artist perspective in that he's telling a story here, I'll go with it. And don't get me wrong, there's the odd thing that made me laugh, right? I'm not gonna lie. There was the odd line that I kind of chuckled at. But yeah, some of it you're just like, you listen to it and you're like, that's not... I don't really think that lands anymore. But I think that's the point. And again, I think that's maybe the argument against it, to be like, you can't just say stuff is intentionally cringe when it's cringe. Yeah, I mean, I'm there with you. I'm just telling you my connection to the album and my feeling when I listen to it. So again, once I understood the narrative, okay, Eminem has battled with addiction. Like, the actual Marshall Mathers almost died from a drug overdose. What he's trying to play out was, what if he just kept on that path a little bit? What would that look like now? And it's obviously not good. And I think he's made it very clear that it's not good. And the stuff he's saying is crazy and like completely out of touch with current events and the times. And eventually he has a song, Guilty Conscience 2. And, you know, I think he called it that for a number of reasons. Most people will probably remember Guilty Conscience 1. We didn't know it was 1, but now it's 1. That was the song where it was him and Dr. Dre, and they play out a bunch of scenarios where it's kind of like an angel on the shoulder and a devil on the shoulder. And Dre is like the angel, which is surprising for Dr. Ever looked into Dr. Dre's history? He's probably not the angel. But anyways, he's the angel on the shoulder. Wikipedia him. He's the angel on the shoulder, and Eminem is the devil on the shoulder. And it's kind of like, you know, he's trying to say, look, be careful, think about what you're gonna do. And Eminem's like, hey, shoot those people pretty much all the time. So that's Guilty Conscience. Pretty funny song. Pretty messed up to listen back to now, but funny. Yeah, it's really not funny anymore. The more I think about it, I was just thinking about that second verse. Not funny. Yeah. Problematic, if anything. But I guess that's the point. Anyways, Guilty Conscience 2. Same idea, but no Dr. Dre. The idea in this song is that it is Marshall Mathers, aka Eminem, versus Slim Shady. Same person, by the way, obviously. But they actually do a really clever thing with the mix, I feel. Most people in reviews I've only seen talk about this, saying that he uses the cadence of current day Eminem versus the more nasally version of his older self. There's more to it than that in the mix, definitely. I haven't listened in depth with headphones, but as far as I can hear, it's almost like, I think Eminem in the mix for most songs seems to have like a double track on there. And I think they've done that in Guilty Conscience 2 as the normal double track that he would have, but they've moved the high end version to be the old Slim Shady version, and then the lower end is the current day Marshall Mathers / Eminem. And I could be wrong about that. Listen to it for yourself and see what you think. But the cool part of that song is that they're obviously fighting against each other in what can be said, what can't be said, and that, you know, one is trying to get rid of the other. Slim Shady's kind of like, you would be nothing without me. But the way that they do those, the top end mix versus the low end mix, eventually those two mixes come together and form a very perfect double track where it feels whole. So it's like the coming together of these two personas where they both agree on a certain part and then they separate again. And the ending of that track leads to like a fight over a gun, and Marshall eventually gets the upper hand and shoots Slim Shady, allegedly killing him. So it kind of seems like I have got rid of this horrible side of me, and now it's just me. And really what follows from that point in the album is a more mature side of Eminem, I guess the point that really, like, I just didn't expect while I was driving to feel myself kind of well up a little bit for an Eminem song. Like, I've never felt that in my life. I swear to God, having these kids, it's changed me. It's really weird. But, you know, he had the song Temporary, and that song is just filled with audio clips of his daughter Haley whenever she was younger. And yeah, man, it was this whole song about, like, how, like, pretty much from beyond the grave, like, as if, well, not even. I mean, he's basically preparing her for his death. And I guess it plays into the later narrative of the album if you listen through to the very end. But more or less, I feel like what he's done is created an alternative universe where Slim Shady, aka, I know I'm saying Slim Shady like he's an actual person, but Slim Shady as in the character, the version of Marshall Mathers that was heavy into drugs, overdosed, and never got out of that way of life, never went sober, would eventually die from an overdose, or did die on that day. So there's 2 songs dedicated to Haley and his extended family, and they're very much like from the perspective like he died. You know, like, these are the songs that I would want to leave you if I was dead. And my God, that hit me right in the heart. I didn't expect it in the album. I thought the whole thing was just going to be nostalgia bait and like a big joke sort of thing. And yeah, I don't know, whenever I started personifying the whole Slim Shady thing, not as just a way to say outlandish stuff and more to do with his drug issue that he had, like his proper drug and overindulgence addiction that he had, that kind of changed the way that I viewed it. So it's like Eminem versus Slim Shady was not so much like, oh, it's kind of political correct me versus the me that wants to say this stuff. It's kind of like the normal me and then the me that uses all this stuff to forget what I went through as a child, because that's more or less what the majority of Eminem's music's about if you actually listen to it, was his traumatic upbringing. Not that that excuses everyone, but I feel like he addresses that pretty well on the album. Like, there's quite even in Guilty Conscience too, he has this whole thing about, like, you know, you spend all these songs saying that, like, you hate bullies and all the people that bullied you, but then you spent your whole career doing the same thing to other people. So he's very much aware of what he's doing and the problematic nature of it. Like, I don't think it's going out on a limb to say, like, he's doing stuff on purpose, or he's being cringe on purpose, or he's, you know, trying to get a reaction on purpose. Like, he's trying to make a point, I feel, at this stage, because he is sober, and he's trying to show how ridiculous that past is that he has. But that song and the last song on the album that features Jelly Roll, yeah, just, I guess, hit me emotionally in a way that I just didn't expect to happen on this album, because so much of it was just filled with offensive stuff. But then it was very much, like, it hit real. There's a couple other songs in there. There's Fuel, there's Head Honcho. Like, I mean, I haven't got enough time to talk about all this stuff. But, yeah, it kind of comes full circle to more or less tell the narrative of someone who's recapping their career and sort of saying, like, I don't really know where I stand with you people anymore. And you people being the fans. It's like, you're not happy when I'm making this new stuff as I'm sober, because you're like, we miss the old Eminem, but the old Eminem was pretty much high or drunk all the time and saying crazy stuff. And it's like, do you actually want me to do that again? Like, I feel like that's half the point of the album, is like, I will show you what that looks like in 2024. I don't think you're gonna like it. And I think it's been quite clear that people don't like it. Critics especially don't seem to like the album. But there's just a part of me that can't help that it's kind of genius. I don't know. Maybe it's just my opinion on it, but I just feel like there's quite a lot of layers, more than I ever expected going in. And the last thing I ever thought would happen was be halfway through an Eminem album, getting a little teary-eyed, listening to audio clips of, you know, him raising his daughter, because it just reminds me of me and my boys. It's a weird thing happens, you know. You have kids, and it's just the minute there's like, you break kids into it, you get all emotional. Yeah, I don't know. I would love to know what your thoughts are. Please let me know. Put them in the comments down below. Like, do you think this was a genuine piece of art that was really good? Do you think this was just an attention grab? Do you think it's just an excuse for him to say crazy stuff about people and have no repercussions? Because for all the crazy stuff he said, I really don't feel there's that much outrage out there, really. Maybe a little bit, but like, not as much as it used to be anyways, with Eminem in the early 2000s. Whenever it was almost more acceptable to say the crazy stuff that he was saying. I don't know. I'd love to hear what you think about it. What do you think of the album? Do you agree with anything I said, or do you not agree with it? Please let me know. And yeah, I mean, if you want to see more 6ep Bro, please encourage me in the comments, because this was an off-the-cuff thing. It's good to be back. Been a long time, but here's episode 70. We did it. And yeah, I really hope I can do more of this stuff for you guys in the future. To 6ep Bro, being back. You stay classy, San Diego. That was the worst way to end this. Sorry.